Hello, I'm Stephen Matchett from Campus Morning Mail, and this is Expert Opinion, where we ask people who know what's going on in education, what's going on. Expert Opinion is brought to you by Twig Marketing, Australia's original higher education marketing consultancy. Got a brand issue or a message that isn't getting out? Talk to Tim Winkler, tim@twigmarketing.com, Twig Marketing, one word. And thanks to producer Amanda Johnson from Twig, who makes Expert Opinion happen. A fortnight back, OpenAI launched GPT-4, which includes functions way beyond the capacity to write passable essays that created conniptions for Mark III. GPT-3 can also design and create courses. Education entrepreneur Corey McLean has a YouTube video providing an example of it creating a course on how to create a course online. But GPT-4 can not only create courses, it can teach them. It includes a Socratic style. Ask it to solve an equation and it won't do it, but it will show you step by step how to solve it yourself. The Khan Academy is already testing this for their online school courses. And then on Friday, OpenAI announced GPT now connects to Microsoft's search engine Bing, thus solving the previous problem of its content base cutting out in 2021. Plus, OpenAI is now connecting to plugins. So far, they are all commercial providers, travel services, food delivery, that sort of thing. But imagine what a research publisher and an analytics provider could do with an information analysis that links to its products. And then on Saturday, Wharton Business School professor Ethan Mollick asked GPT to create a marketing campaign for a biz ed leadership game that they use at Wharton. And he'd created it, which GPT duly did, with a marketing plan, a social media strategy, a website and comms creative, and it did it in 30 minutes. I was able to do this using the tools available today, Professor Mollick writes, doing it without any specific technical knowledge and in plain English prompts. I just asked for what I wanted and the AI provided it. I would imagine that for MOOCs and micro-credentials that this is game-changing stuff. Terrific for managers who want a bunch of content fast and probably cheap. But what about learners and teachers in universities? Associate Professor Kelly Matthews is at the University of Queensland's Institute of Teaching and Learning Innovation. And in November, she said that one of her hopes for AI is, and I quote, that it can make education more human again, so learners and teachers can spend more time in the deep, meaningful and joyful work of learning. Hello, Professor Matthews. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Stephen. It's great to be with you. Hello, everyone.
So on what we're seeing so far with 3 and now indeed with 4, is AI looking all that good for joyful learning and teaching?
I got to tell you, Stephen, I have been unsurprised with the response of my academic colleagues, learners and teachers. People are just having really sensible conversations. So it doesn't sound like a great media grab, but people are thinking about what does this mean? What are we doing? Working together, thinking through it in ways that kind of just define collegiality. So I have been enjoying the conversations it has been causing people to have when they're really rethinking what matters to us about teaching and when we're in the classroom with students.
So what are they talking about?
They are trying to think about, obviously a big part of the conversation is assessment, but when we move beyond assessment and integrity, I think the conversations get more interesting. How can I use this to be teaching ethics? I've got a colleague who's writing a paper with ChatGPT in conversation, trying to understand what it would say and what it would do and how it would make her feel and how she treats the machine, the AI in it. I've got a class right now, I'm teaching the students, and they were all really keen to figure out, well, how do I use this? And how do I use this ethically and in the right ways, and what work can it do to help me with my learning?
These are way bigger questions than concerns over remote teaching during the pandemic.
They're different questions, and one of the things I guess I appreciate is I think after the experience of the pandemic and remote teaching, Stephen, so many of us have kind of realized one, what we can get through when we think about it and how we do it together. The pandemic really shined a light on we need to care about people as whole human beings, not just as workers or learners or students. So I think when we're coming into this conversation, people are coming in it with that mindset, not just thinking about what does it mean for me in work, but what does it mean about the types of relationships that matter and the interactions in higher education we know that are really important.
But that's going to create a challenge. I would imagine institutions will start looking at this technology to see how they can build it into business models. It's going to come, there'll be a debate between that and humanizing it.
So I'm really interested to see actually how institutions move forward, because ChatGPT, to my mind, Stephen, is something different than, you know, a learning management system or a new human resource management system. It's something any individual can use. So how institutions decide to actually build strategy and policy around something that is individual to every person involved, I think is going to be quite interesting. I hope the way forward is that people are going to be looking at how do we experiment with this? How do we learn? How do we ask all the questions that we need to be asking? And then we develop policy back from how people are actually learning from using it. So I think in the short term, it's not going to be as disruptive as maybe people are talking about. I think in the medium term, though, it will be more disruptive.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I have a sense that what it will really do is liberate the curious. That there are ways to use this that even the technology now that I'm quite sure that no one's really thought about. But people who do think through its potential are going to be empowered.
So I definitely think it's maybe it's going to frustrate the curious too at the same time, because people are going to realize its limitations. So I think like many things, you have to try it for yourself because there's so much conversation and to talk about it. I think the way that the Khan Academy and Khanmigo and Sal Khan are using it and thinking about it in schools, it's really smart because it's about how do I practice? How do we help students practice and get that kind of immediate feedback on things that are right or wrong or kind of clear or more certain? I think the way I'm really curious to see is as teachers, how do we start to think about how we use it to help with the work of teaching? And so I think we need those kind of experimentation, not just in the classroom with learning, but yeah, what does it mean? Can I get it to draft a rubric for me? it didn't do a good job. I had to talk to it. We had to kind of, I guess, work together, if you would say that, the ways that we're going to start talking about this. So Stephen, I love asking people this question. What is it about university that matters to you? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say it's the relationships that they've created. It's the networks. It's the people they've got to know. No one has ever said, oh, it was the calculator. It was my computer. It was the internet. So I guess when we're coming forward, I'm keen to see moving forward, because ChatGPT and similar generative AI tools can be so much more interactive, how people start to actually relate to that and create that relationship with the technology in terms of how they go about learning, but also about how teachers do the work of teaching. And I know my research colleagues are starting to think about how they use it within their research.
That's a fascinating question in terms of creating, well, basically a brand for a university to be able to, in its own material, to create a set of values it wants to communicate via an AI.
So the way that I've been thinking about this, and whenever I feel, I remember when MOOCs came out, and I remember listening to a very smart person say that the brick and mortar university is dead. And my Kelly brain was thinking, just don't believe that that's true. But this is a really smart person who's convinced, right, that MOOCs are going to, make everything online learning. So with this, I think it's very important that all institutions, but people within institutions do go back to their values and what really matters to them, so that when all of the noise of all these technologies are kind of coming at us, we can really hold firm to what it is that defines the mission of the institution, the discipline, what it is personally that we're trying to achieve. So I think for me, one of the things that comes through, Stephen, is integrity and transparency. How is it as educators that we can use this in an ethical, responsible way without fear, if you will, but to help that to remember what it is that's human about aspects of teaching and learning and the work that we're doing. So I really am coming back to those human interactions. And I think there's going to be a lot to learn about how these types of tools become a part of those relationships.
But that in itself creates a question of whether learning splits. I mean, University of Queensland is probably one of the world's leaders for MOOCs. It's done some fantastic stuff with enormous demand. And yet that's reaching an audience that's quite separate to, I would imagine, quite separate to what goes to campus at St. Lucia.
Look, so my sense in that space is the MOOC people makers are right above me. We've got academics from all over, have been really creative with how they have taken the idea of the MOOC to do work for them. But many of them, they actually integrate it into their everyday teaching too. So it's not quite, I think, a silo for the people who make it in terms of who it reaches. So it will also be interesting to think with generative AIs, how, if at all, that gets integrated into MOOCs and online learning. I think for me that I'm more interested at the moment of just seeing the different ways and being open to learning from the ways that people are experimenting with it right now.
Let me just come back to that. Is there a risk that we'll in fact have two streams? That providers of training and in particularly in the world of micro-credentials will seize on this, whereas the whole idea of traditional university learning, be it physically or be it online, becomes a separate and quite elite stream.
So here's the way I've been thinking about this, Stephen. My sense, and this is a trend for a while, and it's one of the beautiful things about higher education, there's technical stuff, right? We've got all this great stuff in the world where we can just go learn things. I want to know how to do this recipe. I changed the shower head in a bathroom. Whoever thought I'd be doing that? I watched some YouTube videos because there's just a way to do it. And I just need to find the steps. There's that technical knowledge. I think where universities have been going for a while now is more about the critical thinking. It's more about thinking differently and the ingenuity and creativity that comes from that. And so that's more adaptive. That's more about how we deal with uncertainty and answers to questions we're not sure about. And we need to draw in multiple people. And we've got to be able to hear them and listen and interact and take ideas away from that. So my sense is with the AI tool, it needs the critical thinking. In fact, it can be very phenomenal in helping to think, how do we think critically about the output that's coming from the AI? And how do we think critically about the data that's going into the AI model? So I think that there is a huge amount of opportunity there for universities to also come back to that idea of what is it that we want for our graduates? And what is it that is distinctive, not only just from other universities, but also from the fact that I can practice and I can get technical interaction with the AI now. Again, I think the Khan Academy stuff is really impressive, but it doesn't do what universities do.
It creates a dichotomy, though, within what universities teach, that for courses that require creative thinking and to explore ideas, and those to which there are right or wrong answers.
Sure. And I think within that, though, that's the opportunity right there, Stephen, to help students learn and realize this is something that's technical. This is something I could learn myself in these ways. This is something actually where I need other people and where I need other ideas. This is something where I have to come up with my own judgment. I can't sit on the fence, right? If I'm having a debate or a point of view. So I think it actually can make space for more of that complexity to actually be taught.
Yeah. Yeah. It will liberate the humanities.
It's going to be interesting. I think every discipline has their own way they're going to be dealing with it. I just ran into the head of our computer science department, and I was asking him how it was going with the coding and especially IT and computer science degrees. And his response was, we're figuring it out. We have to embrace it because it's here and we have to figure out ways to use it. But what we need is that relationship and communication with students so that they understand why we're using it the ways that we're using it, when they shouldn't be using it. And so I do think it comes back to that notion of communication and students and staff coming together and really deciding on some of the boundaries, the approaches, the ways to experiment, what it can do really effectively, how to do those things effectively, and then making sure there's equitable access to that information.
Well, that's a crucial question that nobody much seems to be talking about. I mean, this is a commercial product. People have spent a bomb of money to create this. It's just not in the public domain. It's going to be interesting to see how they start to look at these sorts of education as revenue streams. I don't think it's occurred to them yet.
Yeah.
Probably
Well,
too
I think, Stephen, people already think about education in lots of ways around revenue streams. I think one of the things I think about a couple of weeks ago that was in the media a lot was around some of the partners that universities were having, in that sense from teachers and students of it wasn't transparent. Who was actually teaching me? Who was the person behind the course? I think, to me, similar with the AI, there's going to be this things we've got to navigate around trust in relationships. Who am I talking to? Who's giving me this information? Is it being transparent, open, and honest? So I think in this sense, it's just part of the ongoing ways in which universities are trying to generate new revenue streams. And it's more ways in which universities really do need to think about the core values, as people are going to be coming in, as they have for over a decade now, Stephen, and trying to sell. Here's the latest thing that's going to help you. So I think in this case, universities really need to have a clear value proposition about what does it mean to learn at this university with the people that we have here and the people that you're going to meet.
Well, there's another dimension. I mean, research publishers, some of them are immensely profitable. And have learned to adapt and adjust. They may not like it, but they cope with it. What happens when an AI provider starts charging? I mean, they're going to be looking for a return. And what does that do to speculatively overall university finances, to teaching and learning budgets?
So definitely when it comes to budgets, Stephen, this is not my area of expertise. However, I do feel confident that universities for a long time have actually been managing this. There's specialist technology that's quite expensive that we're able to make available to students through licenses and this and that. So I think that's one thing. I think for me, when I was talking about more equitable, my sense is we can figure out the economic aspect. It's equitable in the sense of how do we help students realize the best and most effective ways to actually use this so it supports their learning. One of the things that we saw during the pandemic with the move to online learning is that for some students, the challenge of having to kind of structure their own learning, of having to make more choices, to be more self-directed, that was something that they struggled with. ChatGPT is just introducing something else, another resource. And for students, I think the question is, how do we make sure that students have a sense of how to use these effectively for their learning? And that's not just an integrity question. That's how do I use this to support my learning? How do I manage my time with this, with all of the types of resources? My sense is we're going to be seeing a lot more of these. And so the work that we have to do with students is almost a kind of a meta process of also stepping back and saying, you need to know how to use these things effectively. And part of our responsibility is to make sure students have equal access to the knowledge that they need to use these tools in service of learning.
Which raises a whole bunch of questions. Somebody said to me yesterday that I think they read somewhere that there won't be any software engineers in a decade. That this will basically take that entire function away. But it may well. But I'm quite sure there are going to be a whole bunch of new disciplines and new vocations coming out on the top of that, where what is now the routine of coding will just disappear and be replaced by a large number of much bigger questions.
And again, I think these are all really good conversations for people to be having, knowing the risks and the dangers inherent with trying to predict the future around some of these things. But again, I think the conversations allows universities to have, and the timing it's good and bad, right, Stephen? We've come out of the pandemic. It was really intense. There's a lot happening in institutions. Part of that intensity is people are tired. Yet at the same time, it's a moment to really reflect and say, we really do need to think about what really matters to us in every discipline. What's the type of learning? And so for me, that really does kind of circle back to some of the broader pictures that institutions can have about what is a graduate of our university? What is it that we want for them? What are the types of skills and values that we are instilling in them? And what's the role of discipline knowledge within some of those more broader transferable, or I don't want to say generic, but skills like critical thinking, effective communication, digital literacy, ethical digital literacy. So I think it is time for institutions to probably really stake their claim around that. And then what does it mean to upskill and reskill our teaching staff with the time and space to be able to teach in these different ways?
If everything appears to be moving as fast as it seems, and if new add-ons and new products keep appearing at a rate, these are conversations that might have to happen real fast.
Yes, and I think in institutions that have good systems in place and a culture of collaboration, Stephen, they'll happen in a way that give people permission and time to learn and to do that experimentation that I was talking about before. And so I do think, particularly again after the pandemic, a lot of those processes did get put in place. And so for those institutions, I don't think that's going to be a struggle at all, especially when the motto is, you know, we hire amazingly smart people. We need to trust them, and we need to trust the culture of integrity that we've established so that we can actually learn through this process and then create policy and strategy based on the practices and the data and the evidence that people are bringing back.
Do you think institutions will have learned from the experience of the pandemic, where people felt disempowered in a number of places that I'm aware of? Things took too much time. The actual people in the classroom felt ignored. Do you think institutions will have learned from those errors? I mean, errors they make as they're doing it for the first time.
Look, I hope so. And I think in every institution, there are complex ecosystems, and staying attuned to the people who interact directly with our students is just smart in so many ways. But my sense with that also, Stephen, is there was some learning from the pandemic, but we really do need to sort out our workforce and the payment issues. Tutors interact with our students and casual academics on such a large and regular basis. We've got to find a way to resolve that. So there's consistency in that workforce, and there's consistency with who our students are interacting with, and that those people, the time and resources to actually be a part of the upskilling and the reskilling, and to actually be paid to be in those conversations.
Which raises a whole bunch of questions as to the future of universities as when I say elite institutions, full service institutions, as opposed to at a postgraduate level, the whole possibility of stitching together enough micro credentials to upscale your accounting qualifications. They may well be quite separate streams.
Look, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm not convinced by micro credentials yet, or I haven't seen enough kind of evidence and information about how that fits in with higher education institutions. My sense is probably what it's going to look like is something a bit blurrier, because once we're in a professional workforce and there's a kind of sense of I'm learning on the job, I've got credentials, but I know I've always got to be learning. Really, where that learning is best placed is in the workplace and around where you are. So the question will become how institutions actually partner effectively and genuinely to say, all right, how do we help that learning happen? Not by telling people they've got to come back to institutions or even go online, but how do we help to create the processes and structures within which institutions of work actually have a better sense of what professional learning looks like?
Well, and the market is fragmenting.
More.
Sorry?
Can you tell me more about that?
Well, the market is fragmenting in the sense that the people who need want to learn a specific skill, which is quite small. There are lots of options, increasingly large options for them to do it independent of conventional vet and indeed higher ed. Google launched a whole bunch of certificates last year, and at the launch there were all sorts of people, no one from higher ed. Maybe their invitations got lost in the mail. Just seems that the market is fragmenting quite quickly.
Yes, I think what universities and higher education institutions have to offer in that space, though, Stephen, is this sense of how learning actually happens as a process, not just as a product or an interaction or as a certificate, but how do we actually create those opportunities for learning? So I think in that sense, we've been product driven, but it's actually process driven, where institutions really could have a stake. And my sense is, again, it comes back to the quality of relationships that can be built in the ways in which people can work together.
Are researchers in teaching and learning ahead of the game on this? They couldn't have anticipated the technology 5 years ago, but are they dealing with these sorts of issues?
So my sense is that when you focus on the process of something complicated by learning, and you've got frameworks and ways to think about that, Stephen, then you already have a big toolkit to pull on when these sorts of things happen. Again, you've got to kind of clear eyes, if you will. So it's easy to see what's kind of noise around, and it's ready to come back and say, we've actually got to focus on the process, the interactions, the relationships that are happening. There's some really great models that are out there around how learning happens, what we know and what we don't know, but essentially what needs to be configured or brought together to make the process of learning and the conditions for learning possible. So I do think in that sense, and this is why you have experts, right, in different areas, because things happen and you realize, we've got to draw on these experts because they do have the clear-eyed focus on what we really need to be holding core when we have these conversations.
We've moved a bit of a way, say in 5 years, from people defending the in-person lecture.
So it's funny, I'm running a class today and we're gonna have that debate yet again, because again, I think that conversation is so much driven by disciplined beliefs about what counts as knowledge. And I get my mathematician friends who say, you know, hearing an expert talk through how they solve a problem while they're doing it, you just can't replace that. And Khan Academy has been running those types of videos for over a decade, yet people are still talking to the math class, right? And they want the person, they want a relationship with the person who's supporting their learning, but ultimately judging them and giving them a grade. So I just don't think those relational threads can be so easily disentangled. However, Stephen, 10 years from now, we could come back here and students right now, they say, what's highly correlated with student engagement, and it's the quality of relationships they have with peers and students. Maybe 10 years from now, they're going to say it's the quality of the relationship I had with my AI chatbot. I don't believe that to be true, but hey, maybe that's the future.
Are universities well enough resourced in learning and teaching technologies?
Again, I think with this type of technology, it's interesting, right? Because it's not something that a university has a license to. It's individually based. So in this case, the relationship that everyone can have is quite different. And at the moment, it's not costing institutions anything, right? As you suggested, that's likely going to change. So I do think at the moment, it does cost something different. Probably what's more important is not the technologies we have, but what we have in place so that teaching staff and professional staff and specialist staff have the time to actually learn how to harness and utilize this effectively. So for me, it's a people process sort of a situation. It's not a technological issue in the same way.
Let me close with a really hard and unfair question. If a hypothetical VC came to you and said, write me a job description for a DVC learning and teaching technology to deal with all this, what would be the things to look for in that person's experience?
Well, obviously the easy answer is to say, first you start with ChatGPT and you give it some really good prompts and you see what it comes up with, right? Like that's the obvious kind of answer there. No, look, if they were gonna ask me that question, Stephen, I think what you are looking for is someone who's a boundary spanner, someone who can reach across and understand and think about, I understand the technology, I see where that's going. I understand the economics and the pressures within which current Australian universities are operating in. I'm in line with the kind of policy and government. And most importantly, I see this as something where it's about how do we work with people, because it's the people using the technology, as well as the people at places like UQ and other universities. They're creating this technology, and how do we support that?
Good. Thank you for your time. I know you're busy. You're very generous to us. Kelly Matthews from the University of Queensland, thank you so much. We're out and I hope to talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Always a pleasure, Stephen.